Hi. Yeah. Good afternoon. Today is December 3rd, and once again, I'm heading into a direction that I think will be of value to not only um, to the Chinese, but it will be more valuable to the entire West. To go through, for those who care to watch my YouTube presentations, give you a little very quick background. I was born in China, raised in Brazil and Macau, and with my five languages exposure and the education in the area of counseling psychology, where I have developed a system called PRS 3C counseling system. I'm being a little bit more of audacious to summarize this system, calling it PRS, meaning the psychology of round and square. And then three C's stands for the communication dynamics, the communication analytica, and the cultural sphere. This 3C system was created, developed, and then created totally since 1974-75. And it was already then, during my master's degree, envisioning that with the world today, at that time, we need more good and adequate and system of counseling instead of psychotherapy. That's not to omit the development of the psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud and by its arrival into the US in the early part in East Coast with therapeutic, where there were psychiatrists and psychologists. Their service were all needed when it comes to the application of the medication and because of their medicine training to assign whatever needed for the patients. But since then, almost 100 years later, the evolution of the psychology moving into the area of educational psychology, communicative psychology, and then I grasped in 74 where the visual and graphic of the psychology and the system called TA, transactional analysis, by Eric Berne, Berne, in California, come out. In that same year, I have reinvented in the use of his three circles system and converted that into two other shapes and forms, which is square and triangle. The reason I call it psychology round and square is because the triangle is half of the square. To make it very quick, that's how fast and how quick this particular PRS round and square psychology teaming up with the three C's, and the three C's repeating communication dynamics, as you shall see in the other future graphics. And then the most important in the middle between the dynamics and the analysis, where the PRS will come up in that part of use. Now that's almost 45, 50 years ago. And in this absence of 45 years, when I come back to the area of the psychology, counseling psychology, and the full range development of a counseling system that will go into all cultures, all languages, because it is represented by the basic two images, round and square. Again, triangle is half of the square. Round, when you and I get along, we handshake, we say hello, American style distance, cowboy on a distant, two horses. In Brazil, we hug, we touch, we embrace among men, and we kisses among men and women. But overall, it's a very simple way to the greeting formats. In other cultures or in Asia, or the Chinese or the Japanese, we bow to each other on the rank and file of the on the other side of the party. But the world is becoming very multicultural. And my area of specialty is, after all these years, at age 76, my comprehensive cross-cultural living experience allow me to shape all these cultural spheres. And so by this communication system that I have developed, repeating from Sigmund Freud coming down to, even culturally, let's use Gustavo Jung, we have people like Alfred Adler, Rollo May, Carl Rogers, Viktor Frankl's Men Searching for Meaning. And along the way, we have other therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, from Fritz Perls and all the way to Erich Fromm. And that was the only time in my 60 years business engaged with the psychology in the West. Erich Fromm was the only one who had wrote a book with Suzuki called Psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism. But in short and in rough, what I would like to concentrate today is to share with my audience. There's a huge cultural discrepancies happened, and I named it, since 1492. I love history. I love to read and write about the Spanish Empire, which is much bigger, much larger than any other empires. You look at Spain, 1492, Mexico, all the way down to South America, to Chile, with the other provinces or region. They used Peru, and also very quietly with the silver produced in Potosi, today Bolivia, under the Peruvian province of the Spain. The entire silver, 70%, 80%, were moving up by ship with the Spanish galleon to Acapulco. From Acapulco, they went on all the way into the Philippines, because that is the Spanish Empire in the Pacific Ocean, 6 months travel, bringing Chinese goods into the Americas, and cross over the mountain by way of Acapulco to go into Veracruz in Yucatan, Havana, and Spain. We talk about history in a very open manner, but in that particular time in point, everything of the empire involving trade is very much about secrecy. For those who like history, will see more about this Portuguese venture, starting with the School of Navigation by Prince Henry, and from the city called Sagres in the southern part of Portugal, nearby Algarve, the warmer part of Portugal. And their secrecy and trading venture on in the west coast of Africa had allowed all these navigators and navigations. After 2 years after Columbus, Vasco da Gama turned around the Cape of Good Hope, landed in Calcutta, India, and then China, Japan in the future. 2 years later, of the da Gama's venture, accidentally, another Portuguese navigator ended up in Brazil, Pedro Álvares Cabral. But in actuality, the Portuguese already have found Brazil in 1460s, 30 years before Columbus had gone on to find the Antilles in the island of Hispaniola and eventually Cuba. And make no mistake, if you read about Columbus, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Columbus, Cristoforo, Italian, and Columbus, versus Salvador, also means Christopher, Christ is the savior, Salvador Colón. There will be more books, more videos. We'll be presenting that Columbus was never Italian. He was Portuguese. And I pick up this part of Columbus is in being Portuguese because he was born in a town named Cuba, and in the location called Alentejo, and he was the bastard son of a converted Jewish family explorer also who found Madeira. The grandfather of Columbus was Zarco, Ferdinand Zarco, who discovered Madeira. And his mother is the daughter of the Zarco family, is a mistress with the Count or the Duke of Beja, which makes Columbus' bloodline is the first cousin with the King John II or John II in Portugal. So, I mean, read on about this exploration and history, because such a lot of times when you disconnect, and the Portugal and the formation of the Portugal was sworn in by two orders, the Order of Christ by the Portuguese, and also the other one is by the Templar, the Knights of the Templar. Remember how the Templars control, for the large extent, the finances, the credit card, the credit money during the whole era of Crusades. So when the Templar finally got almost eliminated by the Europeans, they ventured into Portugal, and that's why you see the Portuguese big cross on the navigation is a white cross, and in front of it is the red cross. That means the Templar and also the Order of Christ. And the Portuguese eventually had a lot more different religious order following more of the Holy Ghost, which representing in the islands Azores, Madeira, and all that. But anyway, this is the reason I'm highlighting the Portuguese mystery in a sense. And the Spanish galleon called Manila Galleon, go to YouTube, go to videos, go to books, and that was one of the major voyages created in the Pacific region. And because the currents, all the goods from China gone up to the Philippines, outside of Manila, a little district called Barion, because they are not Christians and because they're not Spanish and they are merchants. And that eventually created one of the biggest export of Chinese silk, raw silk, into the Americas, into the Nueva España, the New Spain. That means the entire Mexico we know today. But remember, not until 1800s, for 250 years, since the 1500s, the Spanish Empire was as large as from the coast of Oregon all the way down to all the states, California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and to Texas. Not until 1840, when the U.S. and the war between Mexico and the Spanish had taken over those southern states. Imagine the size of Spain. But another most secretive, when Spain had that silver from Potosi, had not only helped Spain expand their war in Europe, fighting who? Philip II, fighting Queen Elizabeth. And until they were exhausted with the silver. And likewise, when Spain started to decline, so were the Chinese. Because in between that time, the quiet, secretive export of the silver from Peru, then Bolivia, to Acapulco, went to the Pacific, got into the Philippines, transacting all that silver by the Chinese people in the Philippines, outside the city of Manila, called Barion. Another coincidence, the city of Manila, the church, the square, were a exact copy from Mexico City. So this is the time where the Chinese in the Ming Dynasty starting to become standardized in the use of silver. And in the Portuguese, Spanish or format, okay, quinto, that means 1/5 silver had gone from Bolivia, Peru into Spain. And that's why the Spanish Empire was very, very powerful. Again, just a little minor factor. The silver from Bolivia, eventually they find more silver in Mexico. So by highlighting this history, a world mystery, is coming to my point as a psychologist, as a cross-cultural psychologist with my command of Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, English, and a good amount of Italian. This helps me because my Latin and Greek exposure, Greek I was never learned, but the Greek, in my time as a youngsters in Macau, we learned Latin to serve masses. But the singing Greek, imagine in history, because the singing Gregorian chant, Dominus vobiscum, had commanded the Latin expansion from the Roman Empire to Iberia, and also when the Latins were sung. Today also, for those who teach languages, teach your students to sing in a new language, because they'll become less awkward when they don't know the intonation, especially Chinese get 9 sounds, 7 sounds. Singing will reduce that part of discomfort, not knowing where the tonality, and also in most languages where the tongue goes, cheek up and down. I mean, linguistically, what I found in my working today, by highlighting the secret, the dispute, the warring between Spain and Portugal, and the secret about their trade, and the sworn secret by the Portuguese order and by the Portuguese, the double order, the Order of Christ and the Templar. And so there were many, many other ugly events when the Spanish tried to capture Portuguese sailors and force them to reveal totally about what are the intelligence in the world navigation. Don't forget, by 1460, 30 years before the Columbus got into the U.S., the Portuguese had found Canarias, the islands, the Canary Islands, but they were forced by the Pope to give that to Spain. But they make that trade transaction by allow themselves the exploration south of the Canary Islands and the African coast. They already know Lago, Nigeria today. Lago means lake in Sesame Portuguese. And so on and so forth, coasting along the west coast of Africa. And they already found colonies heading west into the Brazilian continent. And as a traveler, when I left China by way of Macau and Hong Kong, got to Brazil in 1962, I was 14 years old. In and between the Atlantic Ocean between the Africa and the South American continent, we stopped an island called Tristan da Cunha. The island only have a few weeks, days, because it's sunken. Today, Tristan da Cunha is vanished off the map. For those who are stamp collectors, you have stamps from Tristan da Cunha, you're worth a lot of money. Eventually, the Portuguese also found another colonization up further north near the north of Rio called Fernando de Noronha. It's another island, beautiful area to dive, look at sea life and whatnot. So the Portuguese are already having their settlements in Brazil, the continent, also the two islands of Tristan da Cunha and Fernando de Noronha. So we like to read history as what it is, but history seldom is not the official scripture. More so in China, you're the official of the dynasty. You only write good things about the emperor and about his administration. But the gossipy, we call it the wild stories, like this one's about Portuguese, Spanish, navigation, secrecy, and much of that, and a huge secret about Spain, don't want Portugal to know their finds of silver from Bolivia, Potosi, who has sustained the Spanish venture into Asia and also sustaining the Spanish warfares in Europe. But once that silver collapsed, I'm not sure about what time and date, that affected both the Spanish Empire decline and so the Ming Dynasty, which eventually invited the invasion of the northern Chinese, the Qing, the Manchu rulers. History is very, very interesting by many other impact that we are not aware. It's very simple that we watch a movie every day about Vikings. Why the Vikings want to invade going into England? Because this quote unquote Vikings, the brave man, are tired, sick and tired eating dry fish. Winter, they have no meat, they have no food. The weather commands the mobilization of the entire world. So were the Mongols invading to China for the same reason. I read books and novels dating back 3,000, 2,000 years ago. The nomads and the Chinese inside the Great Wall by the border, they wave at each other, they compliment, they exchange when the weather's perfect. Every time there is invasion by the nomads, it's because the weather went bad. There's no food in the winter. They got to come south to pillage, to find ways to sustain. These are the many variables I think the contemporary scholar, like we are, we can find scholar or non-scholar, a scholar not by books and by grasping and by learning of the events. We can talk about the new discovery. And it's in this same vein that I am speaking about the Portuguese and the Spanish and the adventures and the global discovery and the hidden secret they have hiding from each other. It's the same thing I have discovered one major international cross-cultural discrepancies by the West. Once again, the West, since 1492, the Spanish Inquisition, Columbus finding America, has started the entire wave, the Iberian power of Portugal and Spain. Portugal provided the ships. Spain had the conquest in the entire western part of America, Mexico, and eventually to Philippines, represented by the Manila galleon. By the same token, immediately after, let's go through the 3 or 4 phases of the global conquest. The Spanish, then came the British, and then came the Americans in this Anglo-American world because of the Industrial Revolution. Just go through very quickly. The British had created the steam engine. They had also created firepower, which had given them, make their conquest, the colonization in India, 1700s. And 1840, the Opium War, there was already 2 ethnic Jewish family, the Rothschild, who had created their wealth by the Battle of the Waterloo, defeating Napoleon, where Wellington, because he's a local boy from Belgium, in the Flanders, he knows the terrain. Also, that was the first time the British put on their very gallant uniforms, white pants, and pushed the horses down to the marshes, the guerrilla warfare that had defeated Napoleon. Okay. In the meantime, the Rothschild had gathered the biggest fortune by the capturing the market capture in London. Then, during this time of period of opium, there were also American in the opium trade, but they hide themselves behind a name called China trade, not to show the ugly side of opium when Europe, America, the British, the European all condemn opium and know what the opium can do to the people. At the same time, the cost of the Turkish opium were far more, or more, the trip itself is more extensive than the Bangladesh production of opium by the future in-laws of the Rothschild bankers. Those were the Sassoons. And the Sassoons employed the ethnic Chinese or the ancestor ancient Jews in Kaifeng only for the ethnic Jews, and no other Chinese allowed, have built that maximum growth of opium and then eventually penetrated forced sales into the Chinese society. 1840 is also starting, we can call it a decade of the 100 to 200 years of Chinese humiliation. The forced trade of the opium had hurt the Chinese, enforced many inequality treaties, coming in also by the Americans, the British, the French. They were just jumping in to this. Well, the war of opium is basically the guns and muskets versus just the cold arms of the Chinese. They have not advanced. much the part of the Chinese by the decline of the Manchu dynasty, they have been totally sheltered, not wanting to know the West, not care to know what the West had developed. Instead, the Japanese from day one basically denounce even the color skin of Japanese. And this is a very psychological complex issue about Japanese wanting to associate with the European. They think like Europeans. They deny their Asian origin because when they have obtained a weapon by the Portuguese into Yokohama with the muskets and all that, the entire westernization of the Japanese had made them as the parallel as one of the units of the West by their invasion into China during the Opium War. The largest contingent of soldiers looting, hurting China were Japanese, Asian, neighbor of China. But the number in itself is another group of Asian. The largest soldier groups into the Chinese soil were British colonized Indians. No, that's just another off the topic. But what I'm trying to say is that history have many, many angles. And my particular angle today as a cross-cultural psychologist in my term of psycholinguistics is because of the misnaming, is because the Western ignorance, but let me put it this way, it's not a put down. Ignorance is not a crime nor a sin. Something we just don't know before. But once you know about what is going on, especially today, when the Americans have to spend $16 billion to demonize China, I'm a US citizen. I found that to be totally wasteful. And part of this story here where I'm sharing is about this cultural dissonance, is the totally cultural disconnect. And also because the West at the time, including all the brilliant missionaries. I was baptized Roman Catholic in Macau by the Jesuits, by one of the best mission of the Jesuits named Matteo Ricci, who had helped the Qing rulers, collaborated, develop the Mappa Mundi, the most prominent and authentic map for the entire universe, which is totally really much of a debate from the time of Marco Polo, what they brought in the map, and also Batuta, one of the Carthaginian, or the origin of the Phoenicians, the intelligence of the travel, the mapping, the road map, whatnot. But Matteo Ricci is also one of the few Westerners ever, in his comment and by his suggestion, that he literally told Vatican as a missionary that these people in China, by his perception, do not need to be evangelized. Meaning he found there's a much more higher social order amongst the Chinese. And this is now becoming my another exploration among the global Jesuits, starting with maybe the closest here in Wisconsin to Marquette University, and to the Jesuit Center in Macau and in Beijing, and eventually back to Italy, with the Jesuits. But what Matteo Ricci has said about China, he took a huge risk. He was accused by the other two orders of the Roman Catholic missionaries. One is the Dominicans. The second one is the Franciscans. Matteo Ricci was accused not doing enough to evangelize the Chinese. And my time is a little off about the Inquisition. The Inquisition in Italy happened, I think, even before the Spanish Inquisition, maybe never gone through the most bloody, gruesome of the famous Inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada, a converted Jew, who had his brutality, his Inquisition is forever bloody and cruel. But let me go back to this point about Matteo Ricci. He's one of the few Westerners who have made the comment about China does not need, or his perception of China do not need to be evangelized. Now, what I'm trying to tell many of you in this particular presentation, what the Westerners, not only the Roman taking over Egypt or the other invaders who destroyed the Sumerian rich civilization in Mesopotamia. This invader can be Babylonian, can also be Greek, from Aryans coming down from the high plateau north of Iran or nearby the Indian. But what I'm trying to tell you is all these people coming in to take whatever grain, whatever good things the Egyptian had. The Roman definitely took the entire region of Egypt just to support their poor land, less fertile land, to support the Romans. However, the language which I speak using in 4 or 3, Spanish, Portuguese, Italians, and French, all came from the Latin roots of the Roman influence of Iberia, France, Italy. But now, when the West come into contact with China, as a psycholinguistic concerned cross-cultural psychologist, what I'm trying to highlight here is that none of these missionaries, the most elites, academically most elite of the Roman Catholic Church, they do not have a vocabulary to talk about the Chinese do speaking their language from the heart. Let me make another point clear. We have cognition, we're emotion. The confluent that they're using more in Latin America is the affective domain. The affective domain is transmitting from the chamber of cognition, recognition, and then the chamber of emotion. As of late, you saw many, many times, I read American book talk about the emotional intelligence. There's nothing wrong. Still, they have not reached the chamber called wisdom. Again, I will repeat this in multiple times. When you do not have the vocabulary to define what Confucius were teaching, or Laozi, we know as Tao, Taoist, T-A-O or D-A-O by the sound, Taoist, and the teaching of Buddha by way of India. They put all behind Confucius study into Confucianism, ISM. Taoism, ISM. Buddhism, ISM. Because they group the 3 basic sets of value system of the Chinese, frame them into their own monotheistic, Judaic, Abrahamic culture, and hosting only the 3 religious culture all end up by isms: Judaism, Catholicism, Islamism, and later on, Protestantism. So this is where the major discrepancies, when your intellectual, psychological, cultural sense have not been able to find a parallel or compatible study about the Chinese values. And this discrepancy had continued on to today. When the West, for whatever reason, of the moral or immoral capitalism, they have to defame, they have to demonize, they have to make things ugly about communism or demonic. And that same mindset heading into the Chinese. The Americans are great propaganda machines. And the famous propaganda creation in the West in the last 50 years is Bernays. Edward Bernays, the blood nephew of Sigmund Freud, his wife's nephew. just wanting to help his uncle when Freud was not doing well, when the Nazi Germany began, and he fled to England with his daughter, Anna Freud. He asked Edward Bernays to be of help and to finance his business, psychoanalysis. And you will, as you all shall see and read more about Edward Bernays and the machine of propaganda. Take, for example, the first American were ever killed in China, a former missionary in China, just like Pearl Buck, who wrote, the Good Earth. But when he was killed in China, the American created the John Birch Society. And the John Birch Society become a momentum igniting the anti-China, anti-Chinese communism until today. So what I'm trying to say by this very open discussion, in today's open books, as I have created, maybe a kind of a challenging to Facebook. I follow Facebook. I have my platform in Facebook called Conscientization, honoring Paulo Freire, the first Westerners who had using the word conscience and about the conscientization, very much matching the Wang Yangming's in the 14th century China. Conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is a cumulative, our introspective thinking oneself, and reflective thinking of the group, and into the future is imagination. Thinking is a cumulative of thinking of man to create this awareness of human conscience. As a matter of fact, I created the term thinkology, and in Latin, in Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian, called pensacologia. In Latin, it's pensare, and in Portuguese, it's pensa. In Spanish, it's piensa. Italian, also pensa. But just the other day, I find out by watching Wizard of Oz, thinkology had already been used in the movie Wizard of Oz. So what I'm saying that we all create, we all invent, but we don't know when and where something was created. But that doesn't matter. The intention is good and the creativity is good. So if somebody created the term thinkology, now we can call it pensacology, or thinking, the study of thinking is where we can ignite the awareness of the human conscience. And this is what I'm trying to articulating, the importance when I'm advocating human conscience. That is the Chinese speaking language. And speaking is always the representation of our thinking. And I will continue for the next year or so. 2 books are being written. I dare myself to write an address called The Pedagogy of Conscience, following the footsteps of Paulo Freire, and we frame it back to the 14th century Wang Yangming. It's just by accident. My family's birth village, my dad, is from Yuyao. Today is a suburb of the city of Ningbo. And then we share the same heritage of Wang Yangming. He is one of the most brilliant scholars, progressively had interfaced, creating the confluence of the 3 cultures, the 3 basic cultures. I have not even mentioned about Yi Jing and other pre-3300 Shang Dynasty oracle bones scriptures. China is still working very hard to find and locate the linkage of the Shah dynasty, which is beyond 3300, going according to the Western ideas about archaeology and cultural anthropology. Nevertheless, we have jade items with other ceramic items dating back with scriptures writing on it 10,000 years. But China is struggling to identify the locate the Shah dynasty, where the origin, and most importantly, is about the artifacts with the scriptures that makes them more valid, more solid on the discovery. But I just want to let all of you to know about these discrepancies about the Westerners without any vocabulary, without any idea about human conscience. But if you Google conscience quotes all the way back to Socrates, and I am trying very hard to link what Socrates said. I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make them think. And I think in bits and pieces today, while I'm doing my research or conducting my discovery from Socrates to Paulo Freire of Brazil, who've been treated like a leftist, radical, and yet he is one of the most interesting men in his idea about conscientization in action. The same thing goes with Wang Yangming. Wang Yangming said in Cantonese, 知良知, to induce kind knowledge, conscientize. And so with my 65 years of cross-cultural living experience, linguistic translation sharing, but predominantly the Latin Roman language of a Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian. My father went to school in Sorbonne, but I never took French because of youngster childhood thing. I want to do anything not pertaining to my dad. And now I feel kind of regretfully that I do not have the fluency in French that I wish I could have. But Spanish, Portuguese, Italian are actually, I am creating a new linguistic group. It's called Romantina, Roman and Latin. Imagine your vocabulary, you push English, Chinese, you got it. But you push Romantina, all the four languages with the closest word will be located. So you can say, oh, this is station. How do you say Italian? Estazione. How do you say in Spanish? Estación. Or Portuguese, estação. Then come next, Romania. With the AI speed, with the quantum speed of the AI and IT, I even created a brand called ITAI, ITAI. What is it? Information technology plus artificial intelligence. But I kept the I off. Ita in Portuguese, in the Guarani language, Tupi Guarani means stone. And I was in the gem business for the last 45 years. But in this 45 years, I have never given up what I created in 1974. And I know there's a 3C counseling system now attached with the PRS, psychology round and square. I'm excited, and I hope you also will be excited. This is new discovery, a new discovery of the Western linguistically ignorant about the word conscience. Once again, conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is all about the good thinking of man. Reflective thinking, collectively thinking about history, introspection, examine what we think daily. Again, repeating, reinforcement by the Greeks. A life is not examined, it's not worth living. So to extract more idea about conscience, human conscience, this is becoming a new discovery. More scholars will be formatting their idea about conscience. And in today's open format, whatever I say today, it can become a narrative, become in print. People can inject on my open book system. You can find answers in nanoseconds. With what we have, the tools we have, you might use of the system from Claude to ChatGPT to Gemini and to the future of AI assist systems, in that particular second, you will not become ignorant. And the open book systems is by the other intervention or injection into one word, one sentence, one paragraph, one page of the entire book. Any one book to become the multiple volumes by your awakening. You can say, oh yes, I wake up to this idea of the conscience, maybe from the novel of Charles Dickens or from Mark Twain, Victor Hugo, or the marvelous romantic novels, Human Sacrifices, A Tale of Two Cities, in the Chinese novels. Again, the human action, the human have conscience. Thomas More refused to condemn, to be sided with Henry VIII. Somebody would say, how stupid. England finally took over all things from Rome. Well, but the man of conviction always will have his meritocracy to show the world. And this is one coming. I hope this is a brand new science. It's a brand new discovery. Where is our human conscience? Is it conscionable to send bunker bomb to bomb Gaza with civilians? I think conscience will become more and more discussed, articulated to benefit the human race at large. And I do hope there's eventually a conscientological civilization. That Roman destroyed Egypt. The other race that destroyed Mesopotamia. And the Hindu Valley, not yet known. It was destroyed by the nomads, by the invaders. But the Chinese civilization, lucky enough, was protected by the sea, protected by the Gobi Desert, and protected by the Himalayan mountain range in the south. Until the day of the arrival of British opium. I will stop this, and I hope many of you can share and expand this idea about human conscience and expand about the idea of conscientization of Paulo Freire, and when he used the praxis, very close to the word of the conscientology. I use 心学 in Mandarin from Wang Yangming. I termed that 心学, the learning, the study of the heart, into a conscientology, give it a Western name. I'm not being inventive. I'm not being creative to be smart. I'm created so that conscientology can eventually find its cultural sphere matching with the conscientization of Paulo Freire. And there are many common grounds, which we're just discovered. And then we can addressing, all of us can explore where were the incidents, the conscience occurrences, and not to be neglected. One of the simplest thing, teaching conscience. I would suggest to all the parliamentarians in Europe, and I'm suggesting every single congressman in the US, before they take office, they should watch Pinocchio by Walt Disney. And to know the main character of Pinocchio, a Italian novel, and the Dr. Conscience called Jimmy the Cricket. And they all should make a speech pertaining, let your conscience be the guide to their constituents. I think that would be a good, interesting conscience 101 for the entire world, using Jimmy the Crickets. It's that simple. And my engagement in explore and develop the conscience awareness is that we hope someday we do not have allow the ugly people to demonize other culture. And there may be a future conscientological civilization that will not be subjected to the destruction of the marauders, the colonizers, the people who enslaves, stealing natural resources. It's my piece hope and process. I hope we can be better engaged in the future.